Resident Evil was a landmark game back in the early days of the PlayStation 1, inspiring a plethora of other games in its genre, selling millions of units worldwide and receiving critical acclaim across the board. Last week I did a review after having played it for the first time, and I must say that I thought it was really strong. 26 years later, and the game still manages to keep you invested in its two campaigns with strong level design, exploration, and an eerie atmosphere. It was a fantastic game. An all-time video game classic. Like I said last week, given the sheer volume of ports and re-releases Resident Evil received in just a couple years' span, it was clear that Capcom was not going to let a hit game like this go to waste. In 1998, the world received Resident Evil 2, a game that was set up from the start to be a hit, but in actuality, things weren't going well for this one behind the scenes. Development on Resident Evil 2 began shortly after the release of Resident Evil 1, with the first game's director, Shinji Mikami, taking a producer role on RE2, as the game would be directed by Hideki Kamiya instead. Kamiya, being someone who I'm obliged to mention, was responsible for the creation of my favorite game series of all time, Devil May Cry, but that's neither here nor there. Now, I said things weren't going well. It's not that the game was bad, it's just that it wasn't setting the world on fire. The game was going to be about a cop named Leon Kennedy and a college girl named Elza Walker dealing with Raccoon City getting infected with zombies, which isn't too dissimilar to the final game, but like I said, it just wasn't really coming together in a particularly exciting manner. The game was set to release in May of 1997, and when development was between 60 and 80% complete, it was announced that the game was going to be delayed to 1998 as the team would overhaul the game design in the hopes of reaching the desired quality standard. This is when Capcom first released the director's cut of Resident Evil 1 as a way to hold people over. These days, fans refer to the scrapped RE2 as Resident Evil 1.5, and you can play it too, as fans took the time to put a playable build of it together. From what I hear, people seem to agree that RE 1.5 is kinda boring, which was the reason why the team had scrapped it and started over. Thank goodness they had the ability to look at their work and realize they weren't happy with it and begin anew. Because the RE2 we know today is an iconic game, just like its predecessor, having introduced characters and ideas to the series that are just as recognizable as the ones from the first game. But, to close the lid on RE 1.5, maybe I'll give it a shot one day to give an opinion. I decided against it for this video because I believe we already have quite a lot to talk about with the Resident Evil 2 that we got in 1998. For starters, of the games I had yet to play in the Resident Evil series, the original RE2 was the one I was the most excited to play, and that's because of the fact that it's the original version of Resident Evil 2 from 2019. The remake of RE2 is without question one of my favorite games of all time. I have played it several times, beaten it with the best rank on every difficulty. It is just a superb game. So that had me really curious about how the original would compare. When I did a review on the remake last year, I was unsure of whether or not I wanted to play the original to compare them then, but I decided to just review the remake as is and share why I love it so much, and then I do a whole RE retrospective to see how I felt about the older games. And so, here we are. If you want my full thoughts on how the remake plays, you can check out the review I did last year. This video is going to focus on my thoughts on the original, but I'm going to be comparing it to the remake a lot to see how it stacks up. So having said that, this is my take on the original 1998 PS1 classic, Resident Evil 2. The new director for RE2, Hideki Kamiya, believed the game was best off going for a more Hollywood action-inspired game compared to the more slow-paced horror vibe from the first game. And that was exactly what they delivered on. RE2 on PS1 was so big that it came on 2 discs, one for each of its protagonists. Disc 1 houses the campaign of Leon S. Kennedy, a rookie cop on his first day with the Raccoon City Police Department, and the other focuses on Claire Redfield, the sister of Chris Redfield from the first game. She's come to Raccoon City to find Chris, whose whereabouts are currently unknown. The both of them meet in the midst of a citywide outbreak that causes zombies to tour the streets en masse as they have to take refuge at the Raccoon City Police Station, which is also littered with zombies and other abominations. From there, the two campaigns go in very different directions, but I can save that for when we discuss the plot. I used that brief summary to set up the fact that they really wanted to take things to the next level after RE1. In RE2, the players dropped immediately into the action. The city's on fire and zombies are everywhere and you need to try to make it to the police station before the hordes overwhelm you. Compared to how the first game began with an air of mystery, this opening street section of RE2 puts on full display how much more intense this sequel is going to be. From there, I'd say the opening hour of RE2 was pretty challenging. On my first run for this video, I died 3 times in the first hour of playtime. If you played RE1 before this, the zombies won't be too threatening on their own because you're already familiar with their patterns. But RE2 serves its story of a zombie takeover and its design philosophy of upping the action by flooding the RPD with zombies. You'll walk into a room and like 5 or 6 zombies might make a beeline towards you immediately. And when that happens, the handgun you start with that holds like 15 bullets will suddenly feel pretty weak compared to what you're up against. Because of this, finding new weapons feels pretty exciting in RE2. Not that it wasn't in RE1, but RE2 just has so many more weapons in it, and with the enemy design I just described, you will actively feel like you can finally turn the tides against the zombies, like getting Claire's bowgun that fires 3 arrows at once, or the spark shot, the grenade launcher, and a flamethrower. Claire gets pretty decked out with powerful weapons in RE2, and it's really satisfying to shoot zombies dead with them when they previously gave you so much trouble. Leon's weapons aren't as powerful as Claire's on their own, but he does find upgrades for his weapons, like firing 3 shots from his handgun at once. Or my favorite, the part that you get to equip on your shotgun. Leon's shotgun was good before, but the sound effect that goes off from the upgraded version is just so satisfying to hear as it blasts multiple enemies at once. Love how it has so much kick that it'll send Leon back a bit and might cause the camera angle to change rapidly. It's part of the fun. Even with the firepower you can get in RE2, you never want to get super comfortable at the same time. In the first game, when you cleared a room of zombies, it would just be an empty room from then on until you revisited the house later in the game. But RE2 keeps the tension up with a simple change. Zombies will stay down when you kill them, but you never know what will be there when they're gone. RE2 introduces several new monsters you have to contend with, in addition to the ones you're already familiar with. Chief among them, the Licker, a monstrosity that can't see but has strong hearing as it uses its fast movement, sharp claws, and long tongue to tear you apart. At the start of the game, this connecting area from the upper east and west sides of the RPD will have zombies all around, but if you take care of them all, a Licker will show up later, right next to the ladder you use to climb up here. Things like that are sudden jump scares like arms busting through the boarded up windows of the RPD keeps the player on their toes, expecting danger around every corner, which allows Resident Evil 2 to still be a suspenseful game, but also leaving room for more exciting combat than RE1. On the note of enhancements, you'd expect a good sequel to make some quality of life upgrades. If you're impatient like I am, you will greatly appreciate the fact that RE2 has significantly faster text speed than its predecessor. While replaying RE1 for the video I did last week, and probably halfway through my first run of the game, having to read every character of, "Will you pick up the green herb? Yes or no?" as it came on the screen was something I didn't like, but here the text goes by super quick. As for a mechanical change that leaves more of an impact, the game adds a whole new system to taking damage. By default, your health is in the green, the fine state, and as you take damage, you enter the caution state. Take even more damage and go into the danger state. This was in RE1, but in that game, your abilities didn't change with this, and in fact, you had to pause the game to even see what your health was. Now, your health is clearly visible just by looking at the character. When in the caution state, Leon and Claire will hold their hands on their sides, and when in the danger state, they'll slowly drag their feet across the ground as they move. It serves you by making it so you can tell if you need to heal, but also encourages you not to be reckless with enemies because getting to the danger state makes it incredibly difficult to survive if you don't have a healing item. So the slow movement with low health is a punishment for not being careful with enemies. Having said all that, you might be wondering, with the combat being given more attention in this game, how does the exploration factor from RE1 carry over into the sequel? Resident Evil 2 is still a game focused on non-linear environments with item-based progression. The RPD, the area the player runs around in for the first half of the game, has loads of puzzles and locked doors to get through as you have to find the different shaped keys in order to get through different rooms. It's the exact same appeal as the first game. You find a door that says it can only be opened with the heart key, and you finally find that and are excited to go see what lies behind the door you couldn't get through before. You also get that same excitement with a series of puzzles that leads to one solution. Like you have to put these statues in the right spot of this room to get the red gem from the statue in the middle, but also need to light the fire in this room with your lighter to reveal another red gem. Putting these two in the storage room on the second floor will then reveal a key item you need to escape the RPD. This kind of design is just inherently satisfying to pull off. However, I will say I think RE1's mansion portion is more satisfying to replay compared to the RPD and RE2. Like I said, RE2 has all the same exploration appeal as RE1, but I just think the first game had more puzzles and items to speak of inside the house. And then, once you escape to find the guardhouse, you then have to go back to the house one more time to get what you need to reach the underground. And when doing so, you explore many rooms you hadn't seen before, like the basement or the top floor that requires the elevator to access. In the RE1 review, I said a major source of replay value for RE1 was replaying it and seeing just how much quicker you could get through the mansion portion, which still stands for RE2, but to compare, it took me over 4 hours just to reach the underground in RE1 in the first playthrough, and in RE2, it took me about 2.5 to reach the sewers. So while the exploration of RE2 is the same kind of appeal as RE1, I just think the original game has more of it. But RE2 makes up for it with one of its more exciting features. In the first game, you had to pick between playing the game as Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, both characters experiencing different story beats. However, there was no connection between the two storylines, as Jill rescues Chris at the end of her campaign, where he seemingly was stuck the entire game, and Chris saves Jill at the end of his campaign in the exact same fashion. So what the actual story of RE1 is something that's up to interpretation. Hell, RE2 says that Chris, Jill, Rebecca, and Barry all escape the mansion, but there's no scenario of RE1 where that happens. Resident Evil 2 put much more into the two playthroughs dynamic than RE1 did. As stated earlier, Disc 1 is where you play as Leon Kennedy, and Disc 2 is where you play as Claire Redfield. On their own, these two campaigns are distinguished in meaningful ways, like Leon meeting a woman named Ada Wong as they try to reach Umbrella's secret lab together, and how Claire runs into a little girl named Sherry Birkin who she has to protect. The two leads interact with different characters, like Leon encountering this reporter who got locked up in the basement of the RPD, and Claire interacting with the creepy chief of police. Although, different plot points and characters was what RE1 already did. It's how Leon and Claire's stories connect in RE2 that's the innovative feature. When you hit New Game on the title screen of either disc, it'll play the story from that character's perspective. When you save your game, it will be listed as Claire A or Leon A. When you beat it and save your game again, your Claire A file will become a Leon B file. When popping in Leon's disc, you can then load the Leon B storyline and experience a different version of Leon's story that follows up upon Claire's A scenario and vice versa. This is one of those kind of simple concepts that sounds a bit convoluted when typing it out like this, but let me continue explaining it. The opening cutscene sees Leon and Claire get separated by an explosion. The A scenario character will reach the RPD through the front door and be the first one to explore the place, while the B scenario character will then have to go in through the side because of this different starting point. The story plays out differently across the game's 4 campaigns, like how in Leon A, he reaches the STARS office before Claire and tells her that Chris isn't in town and gives her a radio so they can stay in touch. In Claire B, you just see this version of the story from Claire's perspective, but in Claire A, she went through the STARS office alone and doesn't run into Leon until the part where they both see Sherry on the west side of the RPD. The story is filled with changes that make it worth playing 4 times. For example, in the middle of Claire A, Sherry runs off without Claire, and in Leon B, we see Ada find Sherry, where she drops the pendant that she got from her mother, Annette, and Ada picks it up and wears it, which further provokes Annette when the two see each other later. But in the Leon A, Claire B story, this never happens. Another example is how in Leon A, Ada seemingly dies in a confrontation between Leon, Ada, and Annette Birkin, but in Leon B, Ada seemingly dies sacrificing herself for Leon against the Tyrant monster. In Claire A, Sherry gets infected with the G virus and Claire has to synthesize the vaccine for her, but asks Leon to grab Sherry from where Claire left her so they can meet up, something you then do in Leon B. But in the Leon A, Claire B version of the story, this just never happens. My point is, the entire story is riddled with changes that you only see if you experience all 4 versions of its plot. But this also has an impact on the gameplay as well. In this room in the underground of the RPD, you'll find a locker with an item that expands your inventory by 2 slots, as well as a machine gun. I played Claire A first and took the expansion to my inventory and left the machine gun for Leon to find in Leon B. I accidentally forgot to go to this room during my Leon A playthrough, which meant that in Claire B I could take both the item expansion and the machine gun. There are other examples like this in the game where the choices of the A scenario affect the B scenario, and that's quite cool. So you want to play both A campaigns and both B campaigns to see all the differences, like how you explore different bits of level design in the B scenario and even fight different bosses, like how the first boss against William Birkin is something only the B character will have to do, and the same goes for the Tyrant at the end. I keep saying that there is reward in playing this game 4 times, and that's because I actually did do 4 playthroughs of this game, when in RE1 I only did 2 and then sampled some other versions of it. I played Claire A and Leon B on PlayStation, but then played Leon A and Claire B on Nintendo 64 because, like its predecessor, Resident Evil 2 was ported to several different platforms. There isn't much to say between these versions compared to RE1, so I won't spend as long on it, but I'll just say briefly that the PS1 version definitely is the most accessible version of the original RE2, being available on the PS3 store and all, but if you wanted to know how the other ports are, I will first say, hats off to the developers at Angel Studios who worked on porting RE2, this 2-disc PlayStation game, to the Nintendo 64. The N64 is certainly not a slouch of a console, it's just that the usage of cartridges is completely different from the PS1 CDs. But the game didn't compromise on any content. It has all the CG cutscenes and the audio that comes with it, just with very compressed quality.
It's over.
No. I have to find my brother.
You're right. This is just the beginning. It's over.
No. I have to find my brother.
You're right. This is just the beginning.
besides the AV aspect, it plays just as good on N64 as it did on PS1. The video output is not as sharp on N64 as it was on PS1, but that's to be expected across the board for the two consoles. So while not the best version of the game, the sheer amount of effort it took the dev team comprised of 9 people just to write the code it would take to port over and compress these PS1 assets onto the N64 in only 12 months is incredible. I'd try to explain it in more depth, but do I look like a programmer to you? RE1 was released on the Sega Saturn like we discussed last week, and the Saturn was supposed to get RE2. It even got featured in an issue of the Sega Saturn magazine, but the Saturn's hardware, the lack of its success in the Western market, and the upcoming release of the Sega Dreamcast made Capcom scrap the idea of an RE2 port on Saturn. But we did get full ports of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 on Dreamcast, as well as a new game, Code Veronica, that was temporarily exclusive to the Dreamcast. The port of RE2 on Dreamcast had features lifted from the PC version of the game, such as a gallery of art and FMVs, customizable button mapping, and the best quality backgrounds, as well as full-resolution FMVs, probably making it the highest quality version of the game to exist, even if it's pricey. RE2 and RE3 were also ported to the GameCube in the early 2000s, and these are pretty good ports too, having a higher resolution yet again, just without customizable button mapping. But they do have this feature where you can change the controls to where the R button moves you forward and how hard you press the button determines your speed, which I think is the most comfortable setup if you want to use the analog stick with this fixed camera angle tank-controlled game. And of course, I'd be a fool not to mention that RE2 also got a release on the Tiger Gamecom, but the only people who would ever take a Gamecom game seriously are the kind of dorks who want to rush into a conversation being all like, actually you can't say RE6 is the worst game of the series when it's clearly RE2 on Gamecom. Yeah, no shit. I obviously just don't take games of this tier very seriously. I mean, look at this garbage. But that's basically all I have to say on the various versions of this game. Before I went on this tangent about the ports, I was discussing the fact that RE2 had this A campaign, B campaign dynamic that was unique to RE2. However, this system also turned out to be one of the biggest disappointments from the RE2 remake. It turns out that the remake of the game was also experiencing some trouble when in development, much like the original. They really wanted to get ambitious with it at one point, but timing and budget got in the way, so things didn't pan out as planned. So some things made it in the game in a way that feels lame and last minute, but was due to the fact that the dev team was crunching all the way up until release in 2019. No bigger example than this alligator boss from the original game that the A campaign character had to kill that just got turned into an Uncharted chase scene out of nowhere in Leon's story from the remake. In RE2 Remake, the two campaigns feel much more like RE1, where the two stories don't feel like they were even meant to connect at all, as Leon and Claire explore the same areas in roughly the exact same time and somehow never see each other until the end of the game. The Tyrant also gets killed off in Claire's story, but keeps harassing Leon past that point. In the remake, you'll play the A story of either character and unlock the corresponding B story, but the difference basically amounts to the already underwhelming Streets opening being gone for the B character entirely, and the B character fighting the easiest boss in the game at the end and getting to see the actual ending of the story. If you look at RE2 Make from the perspective that the two stories weren't really meant to interact, but them doing so was something that got put in towards the end of development, it makes a lot more sense. But having said that, the B scenarios from the remake leave a lot to be desired given how the original game handled it so well. And it's not like there wasn't room for more to be done, either. The remake had the chance to really improve on the ideas from the original, it's just a shame they didn't get the chance to do so. The story also feels much more fleshed out in the original game. I remember not having that much to say on the plot of RE2 Make when I reviewed it, and in hindsight, I feel like that's because there really isn't that much to say at all. Generally speaking, the remake keeps a lot of the details light in comparison to the original, and this is entirely speculation, but I think it was because of the fact that the remake of RE2 wasn't a direct sequel to any one game. It was a new game that happened to be based on one that already existed. It certainly wasn't a sequel to the remake of RE1 because that was released 17 years earlier with completely different gameplay. And while that game had a port on PS4 and Xbox One, it was not a contemporary game that you could just expect players to have already been familiar with like you could going into, say, RE8 after RE7. Here's what I mean. The original RE2 goes in much more depth through dialogue and hidden writings and what's actually going on in the story. Something they were able to get away with since this is a direct sequel to the hit game RE1, so people had gone into this one after having played that one. For example, it's made very clear that a few months ago, the STARS Alpha team explored the Spencer Mansion and found Umbrella's secret research lab and barely escaped with their lives. And now, a few months later, Chris, Jill, Rebecca, and Barry are working hard to expose Umbrella for what they've done, but are being held back because the chief of police is also working with Umbrella. In the remake, the events of RE1 are basically not mentioned. The T-virus that turned the Umbrella staff into the zombies we fought in RE1 has leaked into the city, which is why the town is overrun with zombies. However, the T-virus is also barely mentioned in RE2 Make. Instead, all the focus is on the G-virus, which was the source of conflict in the original game as well. The G-virus was developed by William and Annette Birkin, and when Umbrella's Secret Service came for the formula, William used it on himself to kill the whole squad so they couldn't get away with the T and G samples. The T samples getting into the water supply, which caused it to spread to the entire city. Most of the plot beats from the original RE2 are in the remake, it's just that, like I said, I feel the original game goes in more detail. In both the original and the remake, Sherry gets infected with the G-virus because William, as a G mutant, needed to use his daughter as a way to further spread the G parasite. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't actually think that was mentioned in the remake. Claire just finds Sherry sick and brings her to the lab to get the vaccine, when in the original game they explain what's going on much more. And like I mentioned, basically all the connections to RE1's story that RE2 had are not in the remake. Most noteworthy of all being Ada's character. In RE1, an Umbrella researcher named John left his notes behind in the lab under the mansion. He was seeing a woman named Ada, and I was thinking, there's no way that's the Ada from this game, right? And it turns out that it is. Ada's whole story in RE2 is trying to find John, learning that he was killed by Umbrella. Annette even mentioning to Ada that John made her name the password on his computer, something I thought was really goofy when you had to use that to get into his computer at the end of RE1, but I refrained from making a joke about it in the last video. The fact that such a minor thing was made into a major plot point in the sequel was pretty cool, and it not being in the remake is a bummer. The reveal that Ada was only with this John character as a way to get to Umbrella's secrets gets the audience more suspicious of Ada, leading to Leon learning that Ada is really a spy trying to get her hands on the G-virus sample and was just using him to help her with that. Compared to the remake where Ada claims to work for the FBI, which doesn't get challenged until the very end of the story. RE2 Make has a good and entertaining story, I just feel like its looser connection to RE1 means that a lot of interesting material is left on the cutting room floor. But I have been seemingly dogging on the remake for the last few minutes. I want to now flip things a bit and talk about what the remake does get right, after having played the original. While the PS1 RE2 is a more detailed version of the story, RE2 Make definitely presents what is there in a better way. I don't mean the cutscene animation, because that improvement is blatantly obvious. I just mean that RE2 Make has much less exposition than the original. This is one of the pros of some of the finer details getting left out. And for the exposition that is necessary, like Umbrella's task force coming for the G-virus, you can find tapes on the bodies of these soldiers that you can then play at conveniently placed TVs with a VHS hooked up, and these will then show you what happened without a character outright telling you. The one flashback you do get with Annette before her death scene connects the dots in your mind with the tapes you may have seen earlier. In general, the remake just goes for a more character-focused story, getting the players invested in the emotions of the scenes as opposed to having large sums of intricate lore, and when playing it through after 4 playthroughs of the original, I still think it works. I still feel a sense of urgency when you have to rescue Sherry from Chief Irons in Claire's story, and that's because they wrote him to be the most despicable kind of person when he takes Sherry from Claire. You could already tell the guy was a freak in the original game, but his additional screen time as well as seeing how this guy talks to a child just reinforces the hate you'd have for him. That's not the only example, of course. I think Annette was a character that did a good job overhauling as well, making her more human as someone who created a terrible virus and feels conflicted between stopping William and saving Sherry. My point being, the additional character work in the remake does make up for what it lacks in terms of lore. The dialogue is also much more natural in the remake, allowing me to more easily get into the story and buy into the characters. I don't mean to rag on the dialogue and acting of RE2 original, because for its time I think the original did a pretty good job. The translation doesn't feel nearly as awkward as RE1, and the acting is leagues and bounds better than the first game. I wouldn't say the voice acting of RE2 is one for the ages, especially when the remake is so much better. However, I still think the original RE2 is a game you can play today, and yes, notice some weird lines in delivery from time to time, but overall not think too much about it since it's pretty decent across the board and was quite good for its time. While I was on the subject of things RE2 Make did that I preferred over the original, that now leads to a discussion to RE2 Make's gameplay compared to the original. Like I said before, if you want a whole review on the mechanics of RE2 Make, my video from last year will certainly suffice. I just wanted to focus on some of the things that I thought about as a result of playing the original. In Leon's playthrough, there's a part where you have to take control of Ada to progress after Leon takes a bullet for her. And in Claire's story, there's a part where you have to play as Sherry to progress. In the original is because she wandered off on her own, and in the remake is because she got captured by Chief Irons. When reviewing RE2 Make, I said these segments kind of killed the pace, because Ada's is pretty easy to get through and is therefore boring by comparison to the main game, and because Sherry's is so scripted that once you've seen it a few times, it tends to lose a lot of luster. But the segments with Ada and Sherry, especially in the PS1 game, made me appreciate what was done with it in the remake more than I did before. The original just doesn't do much with these two besides running into one room, solving one puzzle that Ada and Sherry both have to do, and then running back to switch to the main character. But then you play as them again later at the start of the sewers segment, where you do very little besides run through a couple rooms. Narratively, separating Ada and Sherry from Leon and Claire serves a purpose, as Ada confronts Annette, and with Leon not present for it, he's still in the dark about Ada's motives. And for Sherry, getting her away from Claire gives William the chance to infect her with the G-Virus. However, that's basically it. Now, what I said about the remake segments with these two still stands. However, I think the devs reworking these moments into something more memorable is commendable. I actively remember Ada having to hack into this door before the tyrant catches up to her, or the tension in the first playthrough hoping Chief Irons wouldn't find Sherry in the part where you have to hide from him. Plus, the harder difficulties add much more tension with the fear of losing progress, and believe me, I'd know. The things I prefer about the RE2 remake don't stop there, though. In the original game, once the player regains control of Leon and Claire for good, I thought the later areas weren't that impressive. I felt that the underground and the lab in RE1 were a big downgrade from the mansion and the guardhouse in that very game, and RE2 didn't really fix that problem. The sewers is especially bland, as all you need to do to escape is just find two medallions that go in a slot that open the path to the next area, and there isn't much to it besides that. Then you take a train car down to Umbrella's secret lab, an area dripping with atmosphere, but it also doesn't have that much going on. On the first playthrough, I got kinda tripped up with what was needed in what room, like finding this computer login on the top floor and then needed to use that in this nest on the bottom floor, or how you're supposed to synthesize the vaccine for Sherry when playing as Claire, but once you do get to grips with it, there's not that much to say about this ending portion as far as exploration and level design is concerned. I do like that they keep introducing new enemies like these plant guys or the evolved liquors from the start. The remake just kept reusing the liquor from the beginning of the game, so I'll give credit to that, but the remake really outshined the original here in terms of level design. First, the game opens with a relatively faithful new version of the RPD, where I think the designers worked in ways to make the RPD more puzzle-focused than the original RPD, like finding the 3 medallions to get to the basement or doing these mini-puzzles to gain access to more stuff in the safety deposit room. But once you escape the RPD, the game keeps the hits coming. The sewers and the lab, now called the Nest, were completely done over from scratch. On the one hand, trying to improve what was there makes sense to me, but on the other hand, I just think what we got was way better than what was in the original. You really need to explore the different areas of the sewer to find these chest keys that you need to use to solve a big puzzle to get into the waste disposal. And in the Nest, you have to gather the equipment needed to grab this key card that will allow you to reach the other side of the lab where the boss fight is. I think the later areas of RE2 make lack the scare factor of the RPD, but the design holds up really well in that game from top to bottom. The remake is also home to a more badass version of the Tyrant, a giant monster that chases you throughout the RPD. I detailed this in my remake review. This guy is one of the most memorable enemies I've ever seen in a game. I am biased a bit here because RE2 Make was my first proper horror game, but on that first playthrough, nothing was more menacing than the Tyrant, aka Mr. X's footprints stomping towards me. It created tense situations like him chasing me in a room with liquors, so you have to risk either going too slow and allowing him to catch up, or going really fast and attracting the attention of the liquors. In the original game, the Tyrant will bug the B-Scenario character, but I must say, I was surprised at how lame he was in this game. He almost always got one punch in on me, but then he would do this long ground pound animation which gave me the perfect chance to escape. But then you'd never see him again for another 45 minutes or so of gameplay. The remake really touched that one up. Same for the bosses for that matter. The remake bosses test your ammo management, your aiming ability, and your timing, leading to encounters that were very memorable. RE2 has some really easy boss fights where you have to shoot your most powerful weapons, and you try to get some distance, and then you keep shooting your most powerful weapons at whatever it is, and then that would be it. This being a game-wide thing. Kind of stealing away the moment from what should be cool encounters like the Birkin bosses. Although it's still super satisfying to get that final hit in on the Tyrant with your rocket launcher. Despite my nitpicks with the final level, I still think the climax of the original RE2 is pretty well done. You have to escape the lab before it self-destructs, like RE1, but now you actually have a ticking clock to worry about. When I did my Leon B run, I kept having to run back and forth to the item box to make space for these cables you need, and because of that, I almost ran out of time. I literally beat the game with 5 seconds left on the clock, so that was pretty tense. I also like how the story ends, in particular Leon B. The characters may have survived this nightmare, however the story is only just beginning. I mean, Claire has yet to find Chris, and Umbrella's experiments just caused an entire city to become a zombie-infested ghost town. You better believe there's room for even more exciting sequels after this. Leon B ending with an iconic final line/sequel hook as the composers then go nuts with the guitar and the drums in the credits.
Hey, it's up to us to take out Umbrella.
And that's Resident Evil 2, folks. This review of Resident Evil 2 kind of turned into an original versus remake video halfway through, but I think I should make it clear that regardless of whichever one I enjoyed more, it definitely does not take away from either one. Starting with the original, I thought that the game wasn't firing on all cylinders with the level design, especially when comparing the RPD to the RE1 mansion, and when comparing RE2's later levels with the RPD. But let's not lose the plot here. RE2 is a great game. I'm so glad I finally got the chance to play it, as I was, despite the nitpicks, engaged with it from start to finish in all 4 of my playthroughs. It's an all-time classic, and it definitely is worthy of the hype. I can easily see myself revisiting this one in the future to unlock all the secrets and get the highest ranks. But compared to the remake, I just don't like it as much because from a gameplay perspective, RE2 Make is still one of my absolute favorite games of all time, and from those lofty heights, I didn't really expect RE2 to compare, but the fact that I enjoyed it as much as I did is definitely worth something. If I were to score the RE games I have reviewed, RE3 Make is a C, RE1 was a B or a B+, RE2 would then get an A. It just so happens that RE2 Make is an S tier game. So yeah, compared to what I view as perfection, a great game isn't as good, but it's still a great time. And hell, it does have the more in-depth story over the remake. So don't count this one out, I think both are worth your time. Although, I just mentioned RE3 Make in passing, I should definitely mention that RE3 on PS1 is a game I really don't know that much about, especially since from what I gather the remake isn't that faithful. So I'm curious to see how I feel about the next game, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. In the meantime, I'll just say what I always do. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.